Hello and welcome back to another episode of Battle Chat, where you guys chill out and I talk about BattleCon concepts. In this episode, we're going to talk about Grasp and why it's the worst base in the game. Now, I personally believe that Burst is one of the best bases in the game, if not the best base in the game, simply because it's stat in-reliant. It doesn't care about stats. And it uses start to beat movement, which is one of the most powerful movement triggers and effects that you'll have in the game. Aside from that, Burst essentially polarizes the game, making it so that attacks are kinda divided into those that counter Burst and those that don't. And sure that you can say that for almost every base, but you know what I mean. You usually care about range only because Burst exists, because it's the only thing that has some decent movement that's not reliant on stats. So with that in mind, why is Grasp the worst base? Because it is literally the opposite of Burst. It's a base that is reliant on stats, which is horrible. Because it's reliant on stats, but it doesn't have enough stats to back it up. Let's look at the stats on Grasp for a short while. It has range 1, which is horrible because Burst beats it. It has power 2, which is horrible because Magical Stun Guard 3 is way above that. And it has priority 5, which is halfway decent. And what is the thing about Grasp that makes it supposedly very unique? It's its on-hit effect, which allows you to push the opponent one space or pull the opponent one space. Now, if you look at Grasp and then you compare it to something like Drive or Strike, why would you Grasp? Think about it. Why would you Grasp if you can just Drive instead, which for one less priority and one more power, you get bonus range? Is moving the opponent one space really that good that you're willing to give up 2 range and 1 power to do it? I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, compare it to Strike. Strike is more analogous to Grasp in this respect because they're both the melee ranged things that get countered by Burst. However, Strike, on the other hand, is stat independent, quote unquote, because of the fact that Strike has a lot of Stun Guard, and Stun Guard's one of the harder stats to beat, because priority in itself is a problematic stat. It is the strongest stat in BattleCon, but it is also the weakest stat in BattleCon. The thing about priority is that if you have a lot of it, you'll usually win priority, and you'll usually go first, giving you initiative and allowing you to possibly stun your opponent. That's all well and good. The problem usually comes when you're fighting for priority. High priority attacks rarely have any defenses on them. Grasp being the ultimate example, it has literally 0 defense on it. Because it banks on the fact that when you hit the opponent, they'll stun them. And that's good, because your opponent can't retaliate and can't do anything. But here's the problem. Fighting for priority is horrible because you rely on winning on 2 stat fronts. Number 1, you have to win priority to begin with. And then number 2, even if you win priority, your power has to be higher than their stun guard for you to actually stun them. Long story short, Grasp just requires too many stats to work. It needs either high amounts of prio or high amounts of power in conjunction with some half-decent hit confirm to work decently well. Its on-hit effect that distinguishes it isn't really enough reason to use it over Strike or Drive, because moving the opponent one space is rarely, and I literally mean rarely, that meaningful. It's only meaningful in select matchups. Now here's the thing. This question says, if it is indeed the worst base, how can it be retooled or rebalanced so that it maintains the rock, paper, scissors thing without breaking the game balance whatsoever? Here's the thing, you shouldn't really change the way that Grasp works. Sure, it's the worst base in the set, but one base always has to be the worst. You get me? One base will always end up being the worst, and I'm really glad that it's Grasp, because Grasp has its uses in certain matchups, and this is why it's very important to realize this. Just because that Grasp seems so bad on paper doesn't mean that it's totally, completely useless in practice. Certain matchups can rely solely on Grasp to make that matchup work. And sure, that matchup is only like 1 in every 100 matches or something, or whatever. That's not an accurate number. But you have to understand that the option of Grasp is still useful. It has its uses. There are certain edge cases wherein it will work. And that's the thing about BattleCon's rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock balancing system. Is that sure, certain attacks might get used more, say drive or burst, but the other attacks still exist so that you can pressure your opponent with that possibility. Sure, a lot of situations will exist wherein Grasp isn't that useful, or Grasp isn't as good as doing strike or drive. However, Grasp will exist so that you can counter one of your opponent's plays that no other base style combination can counter. And that is why Grasp doesn't need to be buffed. Because sure, it's the weakest base, but it still has its uses. It still has the edge cases wherein it's useful. I will only lobby for a Grasp buff the moment where Grasp becomes completely useless. However, the introduction of Force Gauge may change all of that. Force Gauge gives everyone the capability of anti-ing Stun Guard too, which is Grasp's ultimate bane because of the fact that Grasp only has power 2. This essentially means that every single possible attack the opponent can play now has the possible chance of countering your Grasp. However, we haven't really seen the Force Gauge meta play out. We're not really sure how often people anti-stun guard and how people hold their force. It's really hard for me to project how much Force Gauge has affected the usefulness of Grasp. I'm sure that Grasp is now significantly weaker because of the Stun Guard 2 thing. However, this also means that Grasp can now be used as a means of countering your opponent's priority +2 antis, because you don't usually need to do the priority +2 anti counter because Grasp is usually fast enough on its own. Force Gauge makes things a bit more stat reliant and stat heavy, and Grasp's high priority might just be enough to make it somewhat useful in other edge cases. So unless we find that Grasp becomes completely useless and has zero use, I feel like we don't really need to change it. Let it be the worst base because it still has its place. But hey, that's just my opinion, and that's just me having a little battle chat. If you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, do put them in the comment section down below because I'd love to read them. If you have your own opinions, maybe you think Grasp really needs a change. Maybe Grasp is so bad it might as well just be removed from the game. If such is the case, do tell me in the comment section down below. It's not just for my benefit, but for others as well. And of course, as with any battle chat video, if you guys have any suggested topics you want me to discuss, do put them in the comment section down below because they will become the topic for a future video. Without much else to say, thanks for watching, and good night.